Light by Swami Kriyananda, and it's the best way to worship. Truth is one and eternal. Realized oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. In chapter 4 of the Gospel of St. John, the woman of Samaria asked Jesus, "Where is the best place to worship?" This question might be expanded to include what is the best church? What is the best religion? Is it important to go on pilgrimage to holy shrines? What is the best ritual? What is the best mantra or prayer? Jesus cut across all such questionings with his reply, "The hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." It was not that the outer considerations of place, church, ritual, etc. are irrelevant. Each person should find their own practices and observances which are compatible with his own nature. One might say with his own vibrations. Not everyone's natural path is the same. God sent different religions into the world to satisfy different human needs. The overarching concern, however, considering that the goal is to find God, is to include in one's worship daily inner communion with the Lord. God is silence. He must be sought, therefore, in inner silence. God is absolute love. He must be sought, therefore, in the silence of love. God is spirit, and thus immaterial. He must be sought, above all, in the expanding peace of deep meditation. Thus, the Bhagavad Gita states in the 6th chapter, "Sequestered should he sit, steadfastly meditating solitary, his thoughts controlled, his passions laid away, for every craving for possession freed. Wherever you are, whatever your outward beliefs and observances, seek God in the silence of your own soul." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning, great souls. We are celebrating this week Swami Kriyananda's 90th birthday. So we were going to have a little video clip, but all our technical support team has kind of disappeared. So we may have some sound, which is, it was basically a talk that Swami gave at his 80th birthday where he reflected on his life. It's just an 8-minute talk. It's a real short one. But I wanted to say a couple things first, and we'll see if we can get at least the sound up. But I've been reading a fascinating book lately. It's called Apostles, and it's about a man who went to all the apostles' burial places. He's he's an author, he's a historian, and his whole connection was how the early Christian church grew from its roots after Jesus died. Because apparently there was quite a schism in the early church between the Jewish faith and the Gentiles. The Jews were, of course, had their religion, had their basis, had the way of doing things, and they expected that Christianity, even the Christians, would follow some of their beliefs like circumcision and all these other things. And the Gentiles, who basically didn't have any laws or rules and were coming onto the faith, and they weren't that fascinated with circumcision and all the rest of it, you know. It was just, the whole thing was, his whole book is about how these Peter and Paul basically were the leaders. Peter, of course, was Jewish, and he knew Jesus. Paul didn't realize that, didn't know Jesus, but was again kind of that other Jewish part of the Christian church. And depending on what community you were in, the basis kind of went whatever way it went. And as I was reading this, one of the Gospels that came up was the Gospel of Peter, which was written around. It was pretty famous during the time. It was written around 300 years after Christ's birth, and about the life of Peter. And I was thinking, well, that would be a little bit like me writing something about the Mayflower. It's 300 years later, but it was just a fascinating look at the early church. And one of the things in the Gospel of Peter is there was a person, Simon, I think his name was Magus, and he was apparently this Satan worshiper, and he was pulling people in. He was saying he was a follower of Jesus, and he wasn't. So according to the Gospel of Peter, Peter went to meet him and stood outside his door and knocked, and there was a big crowd around him, and Simon wouldn't open the door. So Peter found a dog that was there and charged the dog with speaking in a human voice and sent the dog in after him. So, of course, the dog went in, started talking to the person, and got in an argument with Simon because Simon wasn't going to come out. So they argued for a while, and all these people were outside, and they weren't quite sure if this Peter person was real or not. So there were a bunch of dried fish on the wall. So Peter brought one of the fish back to life, and they were all amazed by, Peter's powers. And I thought, it's not a circus. The spiritual path just isn't, I think Peter and Paul's magnetism is what drew us. I mean, when I came onto this path, Swami Kriyananda, when I moved to Ananda, he used to give a satsang every Saturday morning. He'd give a little talk and a meditation. And you'd go into those meditations and you'd sit down and meditate, and the room was just charged. I remember being late to one of them, and a friend of mine walked out, and I said, "So what was the talk about today?" And he said, "I don't remember. I just remember that I feel so much better when I leave than when I went in, because the atmosphere was so good, And being in Swami's presence was uplifting. And I thought, yeah, that is how you grow the spiritual path. It's from one person to another. Even Yogananda said, he could, during his campaign days when he traveled around in America, he said, I could draw people with all kinds of special powers. And he had one where he would, of course, stand up on the stage and have all these cops in a row pushing on his chest, and he'd arch his back and they'd all go flying back into the audience, But like he said, it may draw a lot of people, but it's not going to keep them there. What they need is the keys to their soul. And I think that was what Swami's special gift that he gave to everybody that came there. He got out of the way. He had a way of putting his ego aside and channeling a higher power. And it wasn't something he did. He just let go and let God, basically, and God did the rest through him. And it was just, his example is just prime for us, because, like I say, we grow by us. The thing that attracted me wasn't just Kriyananda, it was also all the people that came there and were at Ananda, like everybody in this room. There's a sincerity, there's a power, there's a devotion that's there that is unique. And it's our family. And we'll see if I can get this video going, and at least you can hear Swami give this talk on his 80th birthday. I'll move this back just because I don't have special powers and it might work. Okay, let's see what we get here. You can watch it flashing, no signal.
how, with the right attitude, everything's come out all right. And as I look at all these communities and all these hundreds and hundreds of people and thousands of people following, I think, well, at any rate, I can feel good about it. And I do. I am so grateful that so many of you have come. I believe that when we die, and we have to leave all those whom we loved behind, and we'll never be in this body again, and we'll never be able to enjoy this life again as we've known it, and do all the things and be in all the places we've been before. Yet I believe there is a string that ties us to everybody we have loved. Everybody we've hated too, but I don't hate anybody, but I have loved people. I love everybody. I love God in them. And those who respond to that love, I believe there is a tie between us. And I believe that you have been brought here, many of you, because you've been with me before. And I think that perhaps in the other world we created a community together and are trying to recreate in this world what we knew then. Master said that when people create beautiful things in this world, whether it be in painting or music or anything, it's because of their astral memories, their desire to create a perfection they've already known, but lost because they weren't yet perfect themselves. And so they had to go through this. But that world is a little bit of a taste of what we can know eventually and be one with for eternity. But we are together because we've done this together. And this is why I've had the good fortune and the good karma to be able to draw so many people, because we've done it before. It's a fascinating thought. If I have to come back, it will only be with this purpose of helping. There's nothing that draws me here otherwise. People think, well, don't you feel happy that you've done this and done that and you've done the other thing? I'm glad that I did it for God. I'm glad that people have been helped by it. But other than that, I don't think of anything as mine. I've mentioned to some of you the experience I had many years ago. I was walking up into Upper Ayodhya and I saw the lights out on these trailers. We didn't have buildings at that time yet, except I had a little dome down below. And the thought came to my mind, I did this. Then I thought, well, do I like that thought? I decided, well, not very much. It's pleasant, but it's very limiting. I did this, that means I didn't do anything else. I did this? Bunch of stupid trailers? No. I'm kidding. That's not what I was thinking. But I did feel, I don't like the thought I did it. For my own happiness, I'm much happier thinking God did it. And that's the last time that thought has ever come to me. And who is me? If there's a little chink through which the divine light can pour, then wonderful, I'm grateful for it. But nothing else matters. Let us all try to serve him in such a way that we can be his instruments of his love and his light and joy, because that's all we are anyway. What makes us different from the beetles and the ants? That we're more conscious. And the fact that we're more conscious means we can be even more conscious. And we see some people have a lot of consciousness and some have very little. So it shows that this little brain isn't the whole thing. The brain can become an instrument for a greater and greater and greater consciousness. How high can that consciousness be? I say seek the heights. Go for a break, you might say. Go till the back of that ego is broken and you understand that he is everything. It's he who dreamed. It's an inconceivable dream we're living in. And the difference between this dream and other kinds of dreams is simply that when you dream at night, you wake up, you come back to the same world. But when he dreams, when you go back to your dream, it's a different dream. This world is his dream, and it's always the same dream. Until you die, and then the dream changes. But it's all his dream, really. He dreamed it all. It's his thought. You were his thought. He dreamed you into existence. And if you can just get rid of that thought of being anything separate from him, you will find that the more you have of that thought, the more joyful life becomes, the more fulfilling, and the more complete. We were born for that one purpose. We were born to know him. As St. Augustine said, Father, thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. So if my life has any meaning, then don't look at all the things I've done, but think of the reason behind those things, and think of what has come through those things. If people's lives have been blessed by them, then I am blessed. Otherwise, I could be an emperor, and what would it mean? You know, Hitler was a pretty big thing back in the 1940s. By the 1980s, children in school didn't even know who he was, many of them. You could make the biggest splash in the world and you'd be forgotten just almost overnight. When I came here a month ago, or a few weeks ago, there was a beautiful pink azalea in my garden. It was just a joy to see. Then I had to go north to Seattle and Portland, visit our centers there. When I came back, the azalea was all finished. The whole bush was just nothing but shriveled petals. That's life. And you blossom for a while and then you're gone. And when you're 80, perhaps you think about it more than when you're 30 or 20. But it wouldn't hurt you to think about it now. When you take your bath in the evening or morning, whenever you do it, and you wash your arm, think that someday it will be nothing but ashes or dust. This body that you have, it won't be with you very long. Don't cling to it, because if you do, then you've lost everything when you lose that. But if you live in him, then you shed this body the way a snake sheds its skin. It doesn't mean anything at all. And you will wander until you finally decide, I'm tired of wandering. It's all very well when life gives you everything you want, but suddenly it doesn't, and that's the trouble with life. And that's what God has set this whole play up to help us to understand, that you don't want to suffer, and you will suffer as long as you live in an ego. Life itself is like waves on an ocean. Where there's a rising wave, there has to be a trough. Because the higher the wave, a high wave doesn't change the level of the ocean. A high wave has to be compensated for by a trough, and an equally deep trough. Every experience of joy in this world, of emotional joy, has to be and is balanced by an equal and opposite pain. Every fulfillment has to be balanced by disappointment. And when you've gone up and down that roller coaster enough times, then you begin to think, is it worth it? I say it's not. I say the only thing that's worth it is to know who you really are. Merge in him. And people often have said to me, you seem so young. Well, I think the reason I'm young is that I don't have self-definitions. I don't have the burden of thinking, well, I've done all this, and I've done this, and become sort of beaten down to the dust with all the things I've done. I haven't done anything. He did it all. Live in the present, and you will have God. When you can be happy in the present, then you have God. Joy to all of you.
I want to close with a Whispers reading. Demand for union with the Almighty. O Father, behold me through the pores of the sky. Smile at me through the twinkling stars. Strengthen me through the sun. Calm my feelings through the moon. Caress me through the breeze. Love me through my love. Throb in me through my heart. Breathe thine immortality through this mortal frame of mine. Speak through my voice. Help others through my hands. Use my mind to inspire them. Breathe through my breath. For within this fragile viola, thou alone can sing thy complete eternal song.